Hi everyone, I'm Alice and I really love pets. Do you have pets at home? As for our family, we have a cat and a lion. Yep, you heard right, a real lion. My dad is a veterinarian and my mom is a zoologist. She works for an animal welfare organization. That's why they often have to travel around the world to help animals that got into trouble. I love my parents and I'm proud of what they do, but I'm often left alone for a long time because they are away a lot. Well, not all alone. I have a cat, Tom. Tom has lived with us for a very long time. He is the rightful owner of the house, and like all the family members, he has his own duties. For example, Tom is an alarm clock for me in the morning. He climbs on top of me and starts licking my face. I simply can't fight off the annoying cats, so I have to leave my warm bed. I wash up, feed my cat, and then I have an ordinary day, just like any 15-year-old teenager would have. My parents came back from another trip. They were dressed as if they had just returned from a safari. Mom said that this time they helped in building a nature reserve in South Africa. Usually, we would gather in the living room after each trip and I would listen to their adventure stories with an open mouth. It always ended in the same way. I begged my parents to take me with them, but they said I was still too young and I had to finish school first. I thought that since I couldn't go with them to different countries and watch wild animals, then we could go to our local zoo all together. I thought it was a great idea, but my mother didn't like it because she hates zoos. She says that the animals are kept there in terrible conditions and are cooped up in cramped cages. Maybe it's true, and maybe she's right, but I didn't think about it. I just wanted to see with my own eyes about all the wonderful animals about which they talk so much. Mom understood me. She realized what it was like to listen to the stories about adventures without participating in them. So she agreed to go to the zoo as a family. We went there the next weekend. It simply blew me away. It may sound silly, but I was 15 and I knew everything about animals from my parents' stories, but I never saw them live. I ran from one enclosure with animals to another until I finally got to the cage with lions. I watched those big cats move slowly but very gracefully around the enclosure. Then my parents came over and a small fluffy lump caught my attention. It was breathing hard and fast. The lump lay all alone. I pointed it out to my mom. Mom gasped and ran away somewhere at the same moment. Dad and I followed her. We found her in the administration building where she was arguing loudly with the director. From their argument, I realized that the fluffy lump was a little lion cub and its mother had given up on it. She said that the lion cub was in critical condition, and if no one helped it right away, it would die. The director said that it was a normal process and it just needed some time to adapt. However, he had to give in when my mother showed him her zoologist certificate. Mom and Dad went to the director's office. I stayed in the corridor and waited for them. In the evening, I asked many questions, but for some reason they didn't answer me and said that I would see everything myself soon. In the morning, I realized what they meant. Tom woke me up again and I went down to the kitchen to feed him, but you can't even imagine how surprised I was when I saw a little lion cub eating from the cat's bowl. It was the same lump I had seen the day before. I rushed to caress and stroke him. Then my mother came in. She said that the little lion would live with us for a while it recovered. Mom was the only person in the city who had sufficient experience, so she volunteered to take care of it, and I was supposed to be her assistant. Mom also added that I should be careful with the lion cub because it limped. When I realized that a real king of beasts would live in our house, I was on cloud 9. I would finally participate in my parents' adventures. I was the happiest teenager ever. Alex, that's what I call the lion cub. And I was always together when I was at school. I couldn't wait to come home and play with him once. I even woke up in the morning because Alex was looking at me and Tom was sitting contentedly on the side of the bed watching it all. Tom seemed to teach him to do it on the whole. Tom was like a father to Alex, and the lion cub tried to repeat after him. So Alex and I played, swam in the backyard, and even watched TV. One morning, I woke up as usual because someone was licking me. When I opened my eyes, I nearly jumped out of my bed. A huge lion with a hairy mane was sitting on me. No, Alex didn't grow up in one day. The thing was that a year had gone by. We spent so much time together with him that I didn't even notice how he had turned into an adult lion. All this time, my parents were up and doing. They tried to release Alex into the wild where the other lions lived. But his 4 paws were still injured, and releasing him into the wild meant his inevitable death because he wouldn't be able to get any food for himself. Therefore, he still lived with us. In fact, the big cat caused a lot of inconvenience. He was becoming a predator, and animal instincts were arousing in him. One evening, the whole family was watching a show about zebras when Alex was a lion cub. He watched them with curiosity. But now, as soon as Alexander saw the zebras, he got up on 4 legs and pushed off. He jumped right onto the screen to catch his prey. But he just pushed the TV set instead of a zebra. The TV set crashed, and Alex hid behind the sofa, frightened by the sparks. Dad carefully cut the power off to the TV. Mom and Dad began to clean up and discuss what had happened. My parents told me and Alex to go to my room. I realized that it was no good, and Alex realized it too. When I sat down on my bed in my room, he came up to me and put his muzzle on my knees. In the morning, I was getting ready for school. That day I was in a hurry, and I forgot something. Do you think I forgot my keys or my phone? No, I forgot to lock the door, and it would be fine. But Alex knew that if he put his paws on the door handle, it would open. My classmates and I were in the park near the school. Suddenly, I heard screams and yells, and then a whole bunch of children ran towards the playground. At first, I didn't understand what was happening, but I heard the word lion among the children's cries. I looked into the distance, and I saw my Alex running towards me, limping on his 4 paws. He jumped on me and knocked me off my feet. The kids on the playground screamed that the lion wanted to eat Alice. But the lion didn't want to eat me. He was just looking at my face, and I laughed out loud. Then the viewers began to woo, but there were no daredevils who went down to stroke the cute lion, of course. A lion walking freely around the city and jumping on teenagers couldn't be ignored. So a few minutes later, a police car, which was patrolling the area nearby, drove up to us. However, the officers were scared and didn't dare to get out of the car right away. They did it only after they saw that I was stroking the lion. They were clearly at a loss and didn't know how to react. When one of the police officers wanted to approach us, Alex began to roar, which scared everyone around. I guess Alex thought the officer wanted to harm me, and he warned him not to do it with his menacing roar. The police realized that I was the only person the lion obeyed, so they asked me to put him into the patrol car. I followed their instructions in order not to frighten the others. At first, I sat in the back of the car, and then Alex joined me. We could hardly fit there together. The cops were scared, but the metal mesh between the back and the front of the car gave them some confidence. However, I saw them jump in fear whenever Alex roared. This amused me a lot, and I could hardly keep from laughing. The officers listened carefully to my explanations and talked to my mother on the phone. After that, they decided to take us back home. My parents were already waiting for us in front of the house, and they told us to go inside. The police officer said that they were obliged to inform the city administration to resolve the problem. Mom looked sad and told them that everything had already been settled. I found out at home how everything had been settled. It took my dad a lot of time to figure out how to tell me about their decision, but he worked up the nerve and said that they had finally found the right place for Alex. I began to protest and tell them that Alex shouldn't be released into the wild because of his injury, and he could die there. I burst into tears. Mom said that Alex wouldn't go there. He wouldn't even get into the nature reserve. Alex would go to a wonderful safari park where he and friendly lions like him would play together. Alex and Tom came to the living room, both looking very sad. They seemed to understand that it was time for them to say goodbye. I wiped away my tears with my sleeve. Perhaps it really was the best solution, because he would make new friends there, and there was clearly more territory than our small house in the morning. The whole family, including Alex, went to the safari park. The director was already waiting for us there. Surprisingly, he walked Alex to the enclosure. I must admit that territory there was huge, unlike in a zoo. Before leaving, Alex licked my face as he usually did in the morning. Then he turned around and ran away limping. I saw him run to play with the other lions. Seeing this, I realized it was a better place for him. My parents noticed that I was upset. Dad smiled and said that I could visit him every weekend. I was very happy because I wasn't ready to let Alex out of my life. And I realized that he wasn't ready either, because then I heard his roar when we left. Don't be afraid, Alex. I'll see you next Saturday. Do you have any unusual pets at home? Tell me about your animals in the comments. Like the video and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Hi everyone, I'm Janine. One night, I had a dream in which I was in the basement of our house. While looking for something, I don't know what, I discovered a secret room. At first I was afraid, but then curiosity got the best of me and I went in. It was such a realistic dream. I was looking around the room when suddenly the door shut behind me. It was completely dark and I started screaming. I woke up right away. I was drenched in sweat. I looked around scared. I was in my room. Thankfully, it was just a dream, I thought. Suddenly, I realized something. The secret room was real. What I saw in my dream had actually happened to me when I was 5 or 6 years old. I had been looking for our neighbor's cat in the basement. I heard the neighbor tell my mom that her cat went missing the day before. I thought it might be in our basement, so I went down there. Somehow, a door happened to open in one of the walls. I remember going into the hidden room, but I don't remember what happened there at all. All of a sudden, the light went off. It was pitch black, and I was scared to death. I guess my brain simply erased this memory because it was so traumatic. But when I dreamed of it, it came right back. It was a clear memory, as if it had happened yesterday. I couldn't remember who it was that got me out of the room. I thought I could ask my mom about it. My mom is a designer, and my dad is a software developer. They both work from home. I rushed into my mom's office. I said, "Mom, I have something important I need to ask you." She looked at me smiling, but when I began to tell her about my dream, her smile froze. "The secret room in the basement is real, right? How did I ever get out of it?" I asked. Mom didn't know what to say. "Janine, it's just a dream. There's no secret room in the basement," she said. She got mad when I wouldn't drop it. "I'm really busy right now," she said and shooed me away. I figured my mom was lying, so I decided to find the secret room myself. Both my parents and I went to bed really early. We're usually asleep by 10 p.m. That night, after my parents went to bed, I quietly went down to the basement. I scanned the walls with the flashlight. There had to be a secret door somewhere. I kept looking and looking, but I couldn't find it. I was feeling really sleepy. When I got back to my room, I heard people outside talking. I looked out the window. There was a car parked across the street, and my dad was talking to the people inside. I was really surprised. What was my dad doing outside so late? Who was he talking to? The next evening, I was in the basement again after everyone went to bed. I had an idea. If the secret door had opened while I was looking for the cat, maybe I should try looking along the bottom part of the wall. When I pointed my flashlight down, I saw a brick that was sticking out. When I pushed it back into its place, I heard a mechanism. Then a tiny door opened inside the wall. I got really excited. The light in the secret room switched on by itself. I walked in. There was a table, a few chairs, a couch, and a bunch of cabinets. There were no cobwebs. It seemed that the room had been cleaned recently. There was a walkie-talkie on the table. When I opened the first cabinet, I screamed, "No way!" There were 2 huge rifles and 2 handguns in there. I opened another cabinet. It was full of canned food. It was clear that this room was designed or even lived in for a while. When I opened the small cabinet next to the couch, I saw it was full of documents, envelopes, and maps. I picked up an envelope. There were a few photos in there. I took it back to my room. I was excited to look through the photos. There was a wedding photo of a couple I didn't recognize, a baby photo, and another one of the 3 of them were together. I was confused. Why did we have someone's family photos? Why was there a secret room in our basement? What was the deal with the walkie-talkie and the guns? Why did my mom lie to me and say there was no room? Who were the men my dad was talking to? Just as I was about to go to sleep, I had an idea. I took out all the photos one by one. I took separate pictures of the man and the woman with my phone. Then I went on to Google Images. I clicked the search by image icon. I uploaded the woman's photo. I got no results. Then I uploaded the man's photo. This time, I got a bunch of results. My heart was pounding. I clicked on the top link. It was a news site. I started reading. This guy had been a famous mafia boss in the past. He had been the head of all the gangs in New York. He had thousands of men working for him. The police worked for a long time to collect enough evidence to put him away. Finally, he got arrested and convicted and was sentenced to life in prison. Nobody knew which prison he was sent to because the police were scared that his men would try to break him out. Now I was even more confused than earlier. Why did we have photos of a mafia boss and his family in our basement? Was my dad working for him? This was a ridiculous idea, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. The next night, I went down to the secret room again. I had to find more information. I opened the cabinet where I found the photos. As I was looking to see if there was anything else, I found an ID card. From the photo, I could tell it was the ID of the mafia boss's wife. That's how I learned her name. The secret room had no phone signal, so I came back to my room. I Googled the woman's name. There were only 2 results. Both were news stories about a traffic accident. She had lost control of her car while speeding and flew from a bridge into a river. She had her baby with her. They both died. Instead of solving the mystery, every new bit of information was making things even more complicated. I was so curious to find out what this all meant. I looked out the window to check if the car I saw the night before was still there. And it was. The light in the car was on, and I could make out the faces of people inside. There were 2 men inside, a driver and a passenger. The passenger was my dad. They were chatting and laughing. A few minutes later, another car came and parked behind them. A woman came out. My dad got out of the car. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw my dad and this woman embrace each other. Was this woman my dad's lover? Then he got into her car and they left together. I had to tell my mom what I'd just seen. She would definitely be upset, but she had to know that my dad was having an affair. I walked into my parents' bedroom crying. My mom woke up and screamed, "Janine, what's wrong?" "Mom, Dad is cheating on you. I saw it with my own eyes. He just drove away with some woman," I said. My mom held me close. She calmly said, "Why are you not in bed so late? You shouldn't have seen that." I asked her, "What do you mean? Who was that woman?" My mom smiled and said, "Janine, that's your dad's wife. Or rather, she's the wife of the man who you think is your dad." I said, "What do you mean, the man you think is your dad? Does this have anything to do with the secret room in the basement?" It was my mom's turn to be surprised. "You found that too? That's a shelter. Come on, let's go down there. I have a lot to tell you," she said. We went down to the basement. "I think you'll need these," I said, as I gave her the envelope with the photos. My mom said, "Now you'll know everything you've been wondering about," and picked up the wedding photo. She pointed to the man and said, "This is your real father." What? My dad was a mafia boss? I screamed. Yes, he was the most ruthless mafia boss of our century, Mom replied. "So, who is this woman with him?" I asked. "That's me," she said. I said, "Mom, that can't be you. She doesn't look like you at all." Mom said, "Janine, I used to look like that. What you see now is the result of 7 plastic surgeries." The things I was learning were so outrageous, nothing surprised me anymore. When I said to my mom, "The internet says you died in a car accident along with your baby," she said, "That's fake news. The police put that up." That's when it hit me. I grabbed the photo of the baby. "Is that me?" I asked. Mom shed a tear. "Yes, it's you, honey. Your face was completely transformed after 3 plastic surgeries. I'm really sad about that, but there was nothing else we could do," she said, and went on to explain. "When I married your father, he was working as a driver for a businessman. It turns out that person was involved in organized crime. Your father learned everything from him and got involved as well. I thought he was still working as a driver, and meanwhile, he had become a mafia boss. By the time I found out, it was too late. He had completely transformed into a criminal. You were born around that time. Your father was out of control. He was horrible towards both his men and me. I hated him, and I was also terrified of him. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, so I took you and went to the police. They had been trying to arrest your father for years, but could never collect enough evidence. I knew all about your father's dirty laundry. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison thanks to my testimony. Since a lot of his men were still loyal to him, you and I were in serious danger. That's why they got us into the witness protection program. First, they completely changed our appearance with a series of surgeries. Next, they gave us new names. Then we moved into this little town. It was a wild story straight out of a movie, and I was one of the characters in it. "So, who is this man I call Dad?" I asked. He's our bodyguard. His real name is George. The woman you saw is his real wife. Every night after you go to bed, George goes home and comes back before you're up. When he's not around, there are other people protecting us." When I said, "I know, they're sitting in the car across the street," my mom laughed and said, "You found out so much." I asked Mom, "Is this secret room for us to hide in?" She said, "Your father had thousands of men. Because of me, their lives were upended. They've been looking for us for years to get revenge. If they ever find out who we are and where we live, they will kill us. But don't you worry. If that happens, we'll be hiding right here. The guns are for our protection. George is, of course, going to stay with us." I was feeling really weird about all this. I had just learned some incredible things. I felt like my head was about to explode. It took me months to process all of this. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you found my story interesting. Bye. On that day, I didn't listen to my parents and decided without waiting for them to go visit my grandmother in the nearby neighborhood by Subway. I just wanted to show a little independence, and it's hard to constantly be under your parents' control, especially when you're a teenager. The Subway was crowded and stuffy like never before. And when I entered the car, people started crowding around me, crushing me. I tried to stay on my feet, so all my strength was thrown into maintaining my balance. But it was extremely difficult. Everyone wanted a better spot. Suddenly, I felt my head spin and my vision started to go dark. Usually, this means only one thing. Only a few minutes remain for me to save my life. I needed to move swiftly or else I'd be done, which is why I typically had a parent next to me. But they weren't there this time, which meant I was the only one who could save my own life. But how could I possibly assist myself? When I felt like my vital force was fading away, I tried to scream and beg for aid with each passing second, but my voice was lost in the din of the crowd, and no one heard me. Then night descended, and I passed out in the distance. The voices of those surrounding me continued to be heard, but they faded over time. Not showing up on time, was I at the finish line? But suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted he was a doctor. "Hello, everyone. My name is Beverly, and I have to live on an IV. I am completely dependent on it, and as soon as the supply of medicine to my body is cut off, the countdown begins. I will only have a few minutes to save myself, and unfortunately, sometimes I'm right on the brink." When I was born, after 5 minutes, my face turned blue and I stopped breathing. Fortunately, the clinic had excellent neonatologists who quickly brought me back to life, but they had to understand what was wrong with me and prevent this from happening in the future. However, it wasn't so easy to make a diagnosis, and from the first days of my life, I was on a paper-thin line between life and death almost every day. I was eventually admitted to critical care. Instead of being able to return home, I was forced to stay for 2 months. As a result, the doctors were able to communicate with my parents. They stated I was one of a kind, but that wouldn't bring our family any joy. And that's because the oxygen I breathe thickens and coagulates as soon as it enters my bloodstream. It sounded as if I was being convicted rather than being diagnosed. I spent a long time in a clinic. I was released a few months later, but there was one condition. My body had to receive blood-thinning medication from an IV on a constant basis, and my parents had to closely monitor it because they had no idea what challenges we would encounter at this time. I began my most active age when I literally climbed everywhere I could reach and wouldn't sit still for a second. And of course, at some point, I was very interested in the tube sticking out from under my collarbone. And every now and then, I pulled it out, exposing myself to mortal danger. Mom had to completely devote herself to looking after me. She practically didn't take her eyes off me all day or night because I was constantly at risk. But it wasn't enough to simply watch over me. My parents even had to complete medical courses so that if something happened, they could insert an IV as quickly as possible without making any mistakes. A separate horror for our family was other children. I was drawn to them, and they were very interested in me too. They were also highly interested in dragging me by the tubes that protruded from my body. As a result, my mother never moved a step away from me and occasionally shielded me from two curious children. I couldn't understand why I couldn't go to kindergarten, why I couldn't play tag, or why my mother followed me around everywhere. I started freaking out over it when I was old enough to go to school, and I even went on strike against my parents. I was rescued at the last moment at school once when I purposely yanked out the IV, breaking the system. Like the rest of the world, I had friends, but because of my strangeness, some youngsters openly despised me. Some students teased me and called me names, but I'm a tough cookie and quickly adjusted. However, this didn't protect me from serious problems. Once my classmates, Sarah, decided to make fun of me and pulled out my IV on purpose. She then turned on her stopwatch on her phone and started counting. I felt the strength leaving me and tried to run out of the classroom, but Sarah tripped me and I fell. That case could have been fatal. But fortunately, my friend Alexa entered the office. They immediately called the school paramedic for help and I was saved. However, complications from chronic oxygen deprivation were unavoidable, and I spent a month in the hospital. Do you believe Sarah felt bad about what happened? Not in the least. When I returned to school, she expressed sorrow about Alexa entering the classroom too quickly. She was not pleased to see me back at school. Why? Because I had somewhat better grades than she did. I studied there for a few months after returning to school. My parents decided to move me to homeschooling after another incident in which my IV came out. Accepting this was difficult for me, but I realized it was for my own good. My dad and I once took a chance and went on a short trip, despite the fact that it was quite difficult for me to do so on my condition. Our path lay through the mountains and everything seemed to be fine until we came to Iraq. I wanted to take a photo. I just had to climb up a couple of meters, and at first glance it wasn't dangerous at all. However, at some point my foot started slipping off the rock and I started falling. The height was small and I hoped that I managed to get off with some slight fright, but I wasn't so lucky. As soon as I got up and dusted myself off, my mother noticed that in the place where the bag of medicine was attached to me, my t-shirt had gotten wet. With horror, we examined the bag and it turned out that when I fell from the rock, it had gotten damaged. Now the liquid my life depended on was rapidly leaking out. My parents immediately began to look for a spare bag. There was always one nearby, but this time they couldn't find it. And when we rummaged through the whole car and all our things, we realized that there was no medicine and that all we had left what was in that damaged bag. We were seized with horror because the nearest town was about 3 hours away, and for the current situation, that was very, very far. We immediately hit the road. Dad was driving and did everything he could to get there as quickly as possible. Mom kept the bag in her hand so she wouldn't lose such a priceless drink. I was terrified. As a result, I was able to get through the medicine even faster. When we were approximately a half hour away from the settlement, my vision began to dim. This was a bad sign. My mother informed me that we had run out of medicine. Our anxiety was mounting and we had no idea what to do because every second counted. Fortunately, I was quite fortunate. My parents quickly figured out what to do. Mom dialed the nearest city's hospital and requested that an ambulance arrive with the appropriate medications. In the meantime, I was slowly losing consciousness. There was a terrible humming sound in my ears. Black spots danced across my vision. I felt weaker and weaker. I understood the danger I was in and even started whispering goodbye to my parents. I just didn't believe they would save me. However, after 10 minutes, our car and the ambulance finally met. Even though I didn't show any indication of life at the moment, I was nonetheless cognizant despite the fog. Everything is a dream, I recall. The doctor is changing the pharmaceutical bag. The horrified expressions on my parents' faces. My strength gradually returned to me after that. It was palpable in every cell of my body. My folks were overjoyed that it had worked. I told them not to be concerned because the worst part was past. I promised myself that I would be more cautious in the future. Following that occurrence, I was admitted to the hospital for a few weeks, And when it was time for me to be discharged, they informed me that the doctors had some good news for me and asked my parents and me to the main doctor's office. We were very nervous and could only guess what would be discussed, and what we heard was definitely something we couldn't be indifferent about. The doctor said that they had invented a completely new medicine, especially for me, which has no analog in the whole world and now to live. I won't have to constantly go with an IV, but it will be enough to take the pills that they will give me twice a day. I cannot tell you how glad I was to hear that. Just imagine, all my life, I've had to constantly carry bags and needles with me. I didn't think that one day something could change, and this news sounded incredible to me. Of course, my parents and I agreed without hesitation to start testing these miracle pills to find individual dosages for me. After all, it was better to take a chance and possibly regret it than to not take a chance and regret it for the rest of your life. So I was about to take the most significant step of my life. After a month of testing, we discovered that the tablets were effective, and on the second try, we were able to determine the optimum dosage. I'll never forget the day. I joyously ripped the IV out with my own hands, feeling not the least bit afraid. Living on an IV for 14 years is now a thing of the past, a nightmare from the past. You can't imagine how happy that makes me. Have you ever noticed someone in a crowd who needed help? Did you help them? Share your response in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to our channel.